use a shotgun, but be sure to pick up the shell casings because they can be traced. Do the killing in a wooded area because a person with a shotgun wouldn't look unusual walking in such an area. Leave the bodies on top of the ground so that the weather and animals can get to them and scatter their parts, and the wood and brush would make it nearly impossible to find them. Today's story comes from 1984 in the Daily Dispatch, which was a daily morning newspaper in Davenport, Iowa. The article was written by Beverly Lindbergh, who was a staff writer for the Daily Dispatch. On a chilling Thursday afternoon, November 1st, 1984 in Arlington, Kansas, a hunter stumbled upon a heart-wrenching scene deep within the shadows of a densely wooded area. In the woods is where he found the lifeless forms of 18-year-old Tammey Mooney, along with the innocent souls of twins James and Andrew Vogelsang, both merely 2 years old. The three bodies laid abandoned in the haunting silence, less than a mile from the farm home of the twins' parents, Deborah and James Vogelsang. Authorities said the cause would not be disclosed until autopsies were completed later today. Sheriff Jim Fountain of Reno County, Kansas, was the bearer of this devastating news. He speculated the trio had been dead since Monday, the day they disappeared from the Vogelsang home. If you want to see this article in its original newspaper format, check it out on newspapers.com. They have articles from over 24,000 different newspaper publishers all over the United States, dating all the way back to the 1700s. You can search for specific dates, locations, or keywords from almost 1 billion newspaper pages. The authorities cordoned off the scene overnight, waiting until the next morning to conduct a thorough examination without compromising potential evidence. Reno County Sheriff's Detective Judy Trujillo said investigators fenced off the area all night to prevent destruction of any evidence. Investigators waited until that same Friday morning to examine the crime scene and determine how the three met their untimely demise. Investigators also said everything appeared normal at the house, about a quarter mile off Kansas 61 and a quarter mile from the nearest house. Uncooked frozen dinners were found on the stove, as if the babysitter had been preparing lunch. Now that's the end of this article, but that's not the end of the story. There's still a lot of unanswered questions here, like who was the killer? Was he or she ever caught? And what was the motive for targeting these poor innocent children and their babysitter? Well, I found a few more articles that help piece this story together, and one article in particular came with a surprising twist that connects the killer to the son of Reno County Sheriff Jim Fountain. This next article was published November 6, 1984, 8 days after James and Andrew Vogelsang went missing, and 5 days after the bodies were found. Arnold Leroy Rubik, an 18-year-old boy described as a drifter, now stands trial for the shotgun slayings while investigators search for more evidence and a motive. Rubik made his first court appearance Monday, November 5th, where he was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, just 4 days after the bodies were discovered in the woods. Authorities said Rubik had moved to Kingman to be closer to his parents. Coincidentally, he decided to make the new move to Kingman 18 miles south of Arlington on the same day the killings had occurred. Although an official motive had not been established yet, it was revealed that Rubik had known Tammey Mooney as his neighbor while living in Arlington. It is also tragically revealed here that Mooney was to be married in just 1 short month before her untimely death. Prosecutors filed a motion in the district court to ask that Rubik's probation for an earlier felony theft in Arlington be revoked because of numerous violations. This man had quite the reputation and was by no means an innocent person. It only makes sense that the police considered him a suspect with previous violations such as illegal possession of a shotgun and rifle during the past 2 weeks, violating hunting laws, failing to keep appointments at a mental health facility, and failing to keep his probation officer aware of his current address. Meanwhile, during the first court appearance, officers on horseback and in 4-wheel drive vehicles combed through rural areas between Arlington and Kingman, searching for more evidence in the case. investigators recovered a shotgun, but it had not been yet determined whether it was in fact the murder weapon. Again, this is where the article ends, leaving us with more unanswered questions. But a little more digging brought me to Kansas case law number 58,828, State of Kansas versus Rubik, which sheds some light on the motive behind this horrific case and the timeline for what really happened that fateful day in 1985. The following timeline was the evidence presented to the jury. On the morning of October 29, 1984, Arnold Rubik stopped at a gas station in Arlington to request $1.40 worth of gas at a service station. The owner accidentally ran the pump to $1.65, and Rubik only had $1.56 in change to pay for the gasoline. Later that day, he went to City Hall and told the clerk that he would have money later to pay for some outstanding traffic fines. In that same afternoon, Rubik went back to the same gas station and purchased an additional $6.40 worth of gas and oil. He then went back to the bank to deposit $4.34 in change, that which included 2 nickels, a 1941 Mercury dime, and the rest in pennies. Some of the pennies were wheat pennies, and a few were corroded. Then he went back to City Hall around 1 p.m., where he paid $5 on his traffic fines. Later in the afternoon, Rubik returned a 12-gauge shotgun and some shells he had borrowed previously to a friend in Kingman, Kansas. At around 6 p.m. that fateful day, the 2 boys' father, James Vogelsang, returned home from work to find not only his 2 sons and their babysitter missing, but also a bag of change had been taken. The bag of change contained pennies, a few of which were corroded and some of which were wheat pennies, 1 or 2 nickels, and a 1941 Mercury dime. Tammey Mooney's trailer was checked that night, only to find her and the boys not there, but there was also a total of $15 missing. Oddly enough though, the coat that she wore to the Vogelsang's house that morning had been returned to her trailer. The next day, on Tuesday, October 30th, law enforcement officers interviewed 3 children who said they witnessed the victims Tammey Mooney, James Vogelsang, and Andrew Vogelsang getting into Rubik's car near Tammy's trailer, which was close enough to be seen from the Arlington grade school. Tammy's presence in the car was later confirmed by a forensic examiner who determined that a hair sample of Tammey matched a hair found on the floorboard in the back seat. The 3 children also confirmed that they recognized Rubik's car because it was a unique black Mustang with horses portrayed on the rear window. On the evening of November 2nd, 1984, the day after the bodies were discovered, Rubik told an individual that his father was chief of police of Arlington, Kansas, and that he had helped his father carry the bodies out of the woods. He described the type and the location of the wounds of each victim. At that time, the details of the type and location of the wounds had not been released to the public. Rubik's father was also not a law enforcement officer. At trial, the state introduced the testimony of Greg Fountain, the former chief of police of Arlington and son of the sheriff Jim Fountain. Greg Fountain had been acquainted with Rubik previously and related a conversation the two had had in May of 1984 one day before going fishing. Fountain talked with Rubik about a double murder case from Sedgwick County in which the bodies were found buried in Kingman County. Rubik was fascinated with the case and asked for more details about murder techniques and ways in which one could reduce the chances of getting caught. Greg Fountain was quoted as saying, "If I were to kill someone, I'd use a shotgun because the pellets cannot be traced to the gun that fired them." Despite this, the investigation found number 6 shot in the bodies, with shot caps taken from the scene that came from a 12-gauge shotgun. The same kind of federal number 6 game load shells and 12-gauge shotgun that Rubik returned after borrowing from a friend that day. Fountain reportedly also told Rubik to be sure to pick up the shotgun shell casings because they can be traced. Do the killing in a wooded area because a person with a shotgun wouldn't look unusual walking in such an area. And leave the bodies on top of the ground so that the weather and animals can get to them and scatter their parts. Also, the wood and brush would make it nearly impossible to find them. The victims were shot with a shotgun. They were shot in a woody, brushy area, Their bodies were left on top of the ground, and no shotgun shell casings were found at the crime of the scene despite 2 days of searching by investigators. At the trial, Rubik attempted to establish an alibi for himself by claiming to make purchases at a store in South Hutchinson during the lunch hour. But this store was closed during that hour, and his story was contradicted by the store's clerk. So what was the motive after all then? It seems to have all come down to money and an unlucky case of wrong place and wrong time for Tammey and the two boys. The state maintained that the motive for the senseless slayings was Rubik's need for money. To fulfill that need, he committed a theft. During the commission of that theft, Rubik was discovered by Tammey and the twins. In an effort to prevent his being identified and prevent his probation from being revoked, Rubik committed the murders. District Judge William Buck Lyle sentenced Rubik to serve 12 consecutive life terms after Lyle doubled the sentence for each count based on a prior misdemeanor theft conviction. Arnold Rubik died in an Oklahoma prison in March of 2021 at the age of 54.